Hello, everyone. We're excited everyone is here to join us today. Just want to make sure everyone can see the screen. Give us a thumbs up in the chat if you don't mind. Perfect, perfect. We'll go ahead and get started in just a minute. All right, it is 2 o'clock on the dot, and I'm so excited to be here with you all today. My name is Alyssa Coates, and I work for the University of Louisiana System, and this is the first session of our Accessibility by Design sprints that we're going to be doing this spring, and we're very excited to start these up again. And I'm pleased to introduce you to Dr. Megan Lowe, Director of Libraries at Northwestern State University, who is leading today's system-wide webinar. Today, she'll walk through how remediation for accessibility is supported through copyright and fair use, helping us approach this work with clarity and confidence. And we're very grateful for her in leading in this initiative. So I'll go ahead and get started.
Welcome to today's webinar, Accessible by Design, Navigating Copyright and Fair Use in Higher Ed. My name is Dr. Megan Lowe. I am the Director of University Libraries at Northwestern State University of Louisiana. My home base is Watson Memorial Library on NSU's main campus in Natchitoches. Go Demons. And this work is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike 2.0 international license. I like to provide an agenda or signpost for my presentations. That way people know what to expect. I hope it helps people anticipate critical topics and points and prepare potential questions. I will start with a broad overview of copyright and then a broad overview of fair use. And I do mean broad overviews. Also remember, I am a librarian and not a lawyer. After those overviews, I'll briefly discuss what compliance with copyright and fair use may look like. Spoiler alert, you probably already know how to be compliant. Then I will discuss what copyright and fair use have to do with access for education and then access for accessibility. Spoiler alert, they're related. Finally, there will be time for questions and answers at the end. So, what is copyright? Copyright is a form of protection provided by the laws of the United States to the authors of original works of authorship, including literary, dramatic, musical, artistic, and certain other intellectual works. This protection is available to both published and unpublished works, and both of those links are live for your convenience. Note that the law says that a work does not have to be published to be copyrighted, but more on that shortly. Certain other intellectual works is usually understood as a way of attempting to keep up with technology and new forms of content and media. It's also important to understand that being out of print, or OOP, does not affect a work's copyright status. A work can be copyrighted and out of print at the same time, which is fairly common. Being out of print is not the same thing as being in the public domain. The definition that I provided on the previous slide was broad. There are a few key things not included in that definition that are important to know. Copyright is a bundle of rights intended to protect the author or the copyright holder. These are not always the same individual or entity. Copyright has commercial implications. This is a key element to this discussion. These rights can be signed away and frequently are, which is how many publishers acquire the rights to works and authors lose control of them. Books, articles, creative works, images, The original creators of any of these can surrender their copyright in exchange for compensation. Remember earlier when I said that a work does not have to be published to be copyrighted? That's because there is a certain degree of copyright that is automatically conveyed on a work created in the United States. However, if you want to ensure full and legal protection under copyright, you must apply officially for copyright. There's a form and a fee to pay. Remember how I also said the copyright has commercial implications? In most settings, particularly commercial ones, to use a copyrighted work, formal documented permissions must be obtained from the copyright holders. This could be the author themselves, their publisher, their estate, or some other legal entity. In some cases, it might require the payment of fees. Think of the licensing fee musicians may have to pay to use another musician's work. This fee could range from $50 to hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, what is fair use? How is it related to copyright? Fair use is a statute under copyright law that allows for the use of limited portions of a work that has copyright without having to have official permissions from the official copyright holder, and probably without paying licensing fees depending on the medium. It was created for the purposes of education and research, i.e. teaching, learning, and scholarship. There are other applications, but these are the ones that are really the most relevant to us in higher education. However, fair use is a little harder to pin down than copyright. After all, it qualifies as a limited portion of a work. Anybody want to guess what qualifies as a limited portion? I'm sorry, guys. It's a trick question. The Copyright Office isn't very helpful on defining what a limited portion is. It only states that there is no specific number of words, lines, or notes that may safely be taken without permission. When using someone else's work, it's best to always give credit where credit's due. That is, attribution and documentation, even if only a small part. If you're unsure, then ask for permission. It's worth noting that APA format has its own ideas about what a limited portion is and recommends that 500 words or less is safely within fair use. Beyond that, permissions should be obtained. But APA does not necessarily address other formats, such as images or music, and how much would qualify as fair use or abuse of fair use or otherwise copyright infringement. When in doubt, ensure proper attribution and documentation. That goes a long way in good faith in the context of fair use. Let's look at these concepts side by side to understand how they fit together. Copyright is a bundle of rights. All rights are reserved. It's primarily for protecting commercial interests. Copyright means that one's use of an original work may require explicit formal permission be acquired. This may involve fees. Copyright can be transferred. A copyright holder may not be the original creator. Fair use is a statute under copyright law. It's part of the law itself. The bundle of rights that represent copyright still applies. All rights are still reserved. Fair use is meant to foster education and research. This is why we can teach and do research and not have to necessarily obtain permissions for what we do. Though depending on the discipline and context, we may have to pay licensing fees. Attribution and documentation of the copyrighted work are critical. Fair use disclaimers can be employed to acknowledge teaching and learning contexts. More on the disclaimers shortly. How do you stay compliant with each? Let's spend a moment on compliance because that's important. With copyright, if you use someone else's work, you have to get permission to use that work. This may involve paying licensing fees. It may also be as simple as obtaining formal explicit permissions from the copywriter. Attribution and documentation are critical. They may not look like the usual formats with which those of us in education are familiar, APA, MLA, Chicago, etc., but there are proper ways to do attribution and documentation. Remember, I'm not a lawyer, just a librarian. With fair use, attribution and documentation are critical, giving credit where it's due. It's what we hammer into our students' heads when doing research. It's not just about academic integrity compliance. It's also about the provenance of ideas. From a practical point of view, if you are using copyright materials in your courses, which I bet you are, ensure that you have fair use disclaimers clearly attached or associated with any copyrighted material you are using. Again, more on the disclaimers shortly. The image on this slide is a screen capture from the Syracuse Journal of Science and Technology Law. Attaching a notice like this represents good faith on your part when using copyrighted materials in the context of teaching, learning, and research. It identifies itself as a Fair Use Act disclaimer. The site is for educational purposes only. It defines fair use. Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976, allowance made is for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, education, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Fair use definition. The fair use is a doctrine in United States copyright law that allows limited use of copyrighted material without requiring permission from the rights holders, such as a commentary, criticism, news reporting, research, teaching, or scholarship. It provides for the legal, non-licensed citation or incorporation of copyrighted material in another author's work under a four-factor balancing. If you were paying close attention, you noted that the disclaimer contained a reference to Section 107. Fair use is outlined under Section 107 of the Copyright Act, which is what we've covered so far. Section 107 is what enables educators and researchers to do what they do. Section 107 also covers the use of copyrighted material for criticism, commentary, and news reporting. This is also where coverage for parody and satire lives. The four factors mentioned in the disclaimer on the previous slide are outlined in Section 107. They include purpose and character of the work, nature of the copyrighted work, amount and substantiality, and effect on the market. See, I told you it has a tendency to come back to the commercial. This presentation will not delve into these factors, but check out the linked guide for more. That is a live link. There's another section under the Copyright Act that's very important. Section 121, also known as the Chaffee Amendment. This section can be thought of primarily in terms of civil rights. The purpose of Section 121 is to ensure that blind individuals and others with certain physical impairments had access to standard print works. However, Section 121 should also be thought of in terms of access to education. It creates a way for educators to ensure that the materials their learners are using are accessible by eliminating the need to obtain permission to transform existing copyrighted works for the purpose of enabling learners to have access. Brandon Butler, Prue Adler, and Krista Cox writing the law and accessible text, reconciling civil rights and copyrights as part of federating repositories of accessible materials for education, a grant-supported project, state that each step of a remediation and sharing workflow is permitted by copy. Remediation refers to making the text accessible. This can be scanning a print-only text to make it digitally available or generating a Braille version of text. Sharing workflow refers to how the remediator provides the accessible copy of the requested material available to the requester. This could be emailing the digital copy of the text to the requestor or helping arrange for the requestor to pick up the Braille version of the text. A highly simplified version of a Section 121 request is as follows. The request, the remediation of the unfriendly text, delivery of the friendly text, and retention and sharing of the newly created friendly text. The requestor can be anyone who has a disability that prevents them from using traditional print or electronic formats. Butler et al. Note that persons with print disabilities, including learning disabilities as well as visual and physical impairments, are explicitly covered by Section 121 and the HathiTrust opinion. The request does not necessitate the purchase of an inaccessible copy of the requested text by either the requestor or the fulfilling institution. The language of Section 121 does not use the language of purchase, nor does it require that a copy be bought. In other words, a library could borrow a book from a lending library and use that copy to create an accessible copy. Remediation can take different shapes. Initially, Section 121 meant converting standard print materials to Braille or other formats friendly for the visually impaired. However, the section has evolved over time to simply read accessible formats to accommodate the various disabilities mentioned on the previous slide. This means remediation can also take the form of closed captions on a video and alt text on images in digital files, such as the images used in this presentation or on social media. By now, it may be becoming clear why this presentation exists. WCAG 2.1 compliance. Butler et al.'s analysis of Section 121 notes that the fair use analysis of HathiTrust is premised on the importance of accessibility as an objective and failure of the market to meet it, my emphasis added. As institutions of higher learning, we are motivated to make education accessible, where accessible means different things for different people, whether student, educator, or researcher. But even without the coming WCAG 2.1 compliance requirement, institutions of higher learning already had and will continue to have a responsibility to accessibility. Section 121 means that institutions of higher learning must remedy the failure in the market. WCAG 2.1 is also part of that effort. Section 121 helps institutions of higher learning address existing materials. WCAG 2.1 is an attempt to ensure that more materials are born accessible. In essence, WCAG 2.1 puts remediation at the front of the workflow, rather than in the middle like Section 121 does. And now we will open it up for questions. That did not take as long as I thought it would, but that's okay.
It looks like we have one question so far. It says, so is it okay to scan an entire print textbook for someone who requests it?
Hi, Brandy, fellow librarian. If you are scanning that textbook under section 121 for an accommodation, then yes, you can. But you would need to, as you would for other fair use applications, have documentation available for the reason that you do this. You would need to say this was created under section 121. You would have to do a fair use disclaimer, rather like the section 107 one, but one where you say this request was made on this date, we made the text accessible in this way, that's why this version exists. I see the question about applying this regulation to a YouTube video. It would depend about the YouTube video, because a lot of YouTube videos are now sort of enabled with closed captioning, so the option is there already to turn it on for users. If you are talking about a YouTube video that you yourself have made, the expectation is that you will subtitle it or otherwise make a transcript available for the presentation. I probably sounded a little more robotic than people who know me well expected, because I deliberately was reading from a script that will be uploaded as a transcript along with this video to accommodate section 121. Looks like Brandy had another question, but it looks like it's also been answered. Brandy, I also believe, though, that if you have someone who has requested an accommodation like that, you can work with your Office of Accommodation to ensure that. Wanda has asked, if you are scanning a print text, how is accommodation being made? Wanda, if it is scanned appropriately with OCR in mind, then that can be fed through some kind of reader that the visually impaired might use. Let's see. That is how the accommodation is being made there. But my best friend's husband is legally blind through a disease of macular degeneration, and he uses a reader. And as long as you can get that digital text in through that reader, it's able to read the text. But I want y'all to think about the number of print textbooks out there that do not have an electronic counterpart at all. Think about that. It's a regular YouTube video that I need to use in your online class, and you set up the closed captioning. I believe that the closed captioning is your section 121. I believe you have done what you needed to do in that situation. Because it belongs to someone else, they still kind of have control. There are copyright disclaimers for YouTube videos. There are for some. A lot of YouTube commentators will use section 107 disclaimers. They're going to be using clips of other people's work, so they will use those disclaimers at the beginning. What you really want to look for are YouTube videos that are using Creative Commons licensing, which means that they will allow people to modify their copyrighted work in ways that may transform the text to make it more accessible. What about information and images and presentations like this one? Thanks for that question. So in my presentation, there's obviously more of what I said in what I said than what I had on the slides. That's why I have a transcript. Again, people who may know me are like, wow, she sounds like a robot. They finally caught her and medicated her? No. I worked from a script because I knew this would be recorded. And I also know that closed captioning can be really problematic, even AI captured transcribing. And so I created this script that will be uploaded because that can also serve as an accommodation for someone. The images in my presentation all had alt text or were marked as decorative. So the fair use disclaimer that you saw was an image that had been captured, but in the alt text for that, in the alt text for it, I actually spelled it all out. So somebody who might be using a reader for accommodation, rather visually, or because they have a TBI, or because they may have dyslexia, they'll be able to have that read to them because the alt text contains everything that's in it. Let's see. Yes, you can technically create a downloadable transcript based on the YouTube video without harming the video owner or their rights. I'm also finding that a lot of YouTube creators are being mindful of allowing for transcription, creating their own transcription, being friendly about subtitles, being friendly about closed captioning, and even better in some cases, using chapters in the creation of their YouTube video so that people can jump through videos and still get the transcript to line up. And I think that that's wonderful. Obviously, in a live presentation, a bit of a limit on what I can do to be friendly, which again, all of my images have alt text. If it was just something decorative, I marked it decorative. I tried to make sure that the really important material was covered on the slides. There is some stuff that I have in the transcript. The really important information can be gleaned from one or the other or together. It's all about, in a manner of speaking, remediation is about offering options because there is only so much in anticipation that we can do for our learners. But the more anticipation that we do upfront, the better it will be for them. And frankly, sometimes the less remediation we'll have to do after the fact. These are some really great presentations. Kelsey, did that answer your question? Hopefully, yes. Brandy is actually calling me out because Brandy actually does know me and has seen me present live action at conferences. And I do tend to be a little more animated and a little less structured. But I am, Brandy, trying to be more mindful of that, especially when I'm in person to sort of stay on script, especially when I know that a presentation may be being streamed so that it's easier to capture. Are there any other questions? If someone wanted to use points in this presentation to make a guide, well, I put this under a Creative Commons share alike licensing agreement, which means as long as you give me credit, you can use whatever you want from this, any of it at all. If you wanted to get a copy of this presentation, Kelsey, and rebrand it for your institution, as long as you say original content came from Megan Lowe, you're good to go. And I did that on purpose because I know that finding this kind of information and making it available is important. And so I put that Creative Commons license on there. I'm essentially unbundling my rights and making it easier for other people to use this material in the ways that they see fit. Also, because I meant for this to be educational, by all means, use section 107 to its utmost. I'm going to go back to, are there any other questions? Because I'm here, I got an hour for y'all. I made it through my presentation a little faster than I intended. Before anybody asks, so how do I remediate problem texts? There are a lot of ways to remediate. And I did sort of briefly address that, but I was talking with Alyssa before the presentation started about remediating particularly problematic things. And sometimes you exhaust your options. You know, you can try to find a cleaner scan of an article from a journal. But at the end of the day, there's only so much that scanning for OCR can do. And at that point, your option becomes a willingness to type up the document that you're using word for word into Microsoft Word. Nightmare, I know, but if you happen to have a graduate assistant who needs a task, that is possible. I actually did type up an entire short story for a faculty member at my previous institution to create an accessible copy for a student. It's not fun. And it was just a short story, so it was just text. There weren't any images or anything like that. But if that was what needed to be done, then that's what I did. I am not saying that librarians should start offering that. This is because I saw several librarians in the chat, and I don't want y'all coming for me at the next conference. I'm not saying that that's what we do, but sometimes that might be the last resort to create an accessible copy of a material. It's worth noting that a lot of this has to do with the ADA, with the American Disabilities Act. And ADA uses the term reasonable accommodation. And it's a very tricky term because what is reasonable to the individual may not be actually reasonable for the institution and vice versa. And so it can be really hard to balance the needs of the individual and the needs of the institution and what they're actually able to do. Does simply citing an APA MLA fully cover someone? Or would an upload of a student paper, for example, also need the Fair Use Act disclaimer? If you're just doing traditional research, Rebecca, simply citing covers you under fair use if you're doing it in an education or research context. Now, if you're going to use a student paper, you're going to upload it for students in the future to see an example of a paper. Either it's good or it's bad. I've seen both. I was an English major. I would actually get permission from that student and do a fair use disclaimer. Because remember, it's their work. And yes, they might have done it at your behest as an assignment. But if we're wanting to model responsible, respectful behavior for people's copyright rights, then that's a good way to do that. It's also good to have fair use disclaimers on articles that you might have gotten from your library's databases and are sharing with your students through Moodle or through Canvas. That having that attached there is a good faith way of showing I'm doing this in the appropriate context under the purview of 107, and that's why it's here. That way, if for some reason somebody was to find out and they were to come for you, you can say, no, it was done in this context for this reason. I was not trying to commercially benefit from it, which is usually what makes people mad is, did they make money off me? No, I was using it to teach a class. Let's see, the library prints an out-of-print textbook that is available PDF. Yes, you will need a fair use disclaimer because just because it's out of print doesn't mean that it's out of copyright. So you will need that fair use disclaimer for that. I actually had a faculty member who had scanned an entire out-of-print book and dropped it in her Moodle. Not to accommodate anybody, but because the book was not purchasable anywhere for her students. And I had to tell her, you can't do that. You might be able to put up a couple of key chapters from that book under fair use, but Section 107 is not going to cover your use of this at all because this was done for a teaching context, but it's still owned by the copyright holder just because it's out of print. So yes, create that fair use disclaimer. Are you making up this disclaimer? You are making it up in so much as that you're going to want to put Nichols branding on it or your library's branding on it. But the fair use disclaimer I showed earlier in this presentation is pretty standard. So there's a template there in so much as that's the language that you can use safely for that. But if you are doing it for your purposes, then brand it with your institution or your library so that you can say, if for some reason this gets out in the world, you can say, no. We did this, totally we did this, but we are a library and we did it for this reason under these auspices. And technically, since it's a print textbook that's out of print, you could say we also were doing this in anticipation of making this available under Section 121. So you could double down and have a disclaimer that says, we did this for 107 and we did this for 121. Really cover your bases there. Any other questions? Obviously, I love talking about fair use and copyright. It's some fun stuff to me. Tricksy, but also it gives us a lot of leeway to do what we need to do. And that is the double-edged sword that is copyright, is that it protects us, but then it's also like you're kind of on your own for figuring some of this stuff out. Good luck. Any other questions? All right, then let me go back to my presentation really briefly. I lost myself. There we are. So everything is linked within the presentation itself, and you can also see my references. This is what we call attribution and documentation, where I use somebody's direct words like Butler et al. Please go. And that is a really excellent text. If you Google the law and accessible texts, it's very easy to find. It's a white paper. It's available out there on the web for your use. It's been very useful to me understanding the intersection between civil rights and accessible education. And then also my contact information. So if you are not the kind of person who feels comfortable asking questions in the middle of the webinar, or you are, how do I ask this question without sounding crazy? Or how do I sound this question without sounding sketchy? Dadgummit, the webinar's over. Please feel free to reach out to me. Here is my email address. I am very easy to find. There's, I think, only one other Lowe on my campus, and I'm married to him. So if you accidentally email him, he's going to go, I am the wrong Lowe. Here's the right Lowe. LOWEME@nsula.edu. If you are a LinkedIn person, come connect with me. I'm not on there as much as I used to be, but sometimes people feel more comfortable connecting in that way, and that's fine with me. But I'm here. I'm a resource. Also, don't hesitate, for those of you who are not librarians, to reach out to your own librarians on your own campuses, because a lot of us who work in libraries, this is a lot of what we do. This is a lot of how we deal with this stuff in terms of open educational resources, affordable education resources. We look at this through Creative Commons lens. We look at this through accessibility lens. And a lot of librarians are doing this work already and have that familiarity. You can see that Brandy and I are on the same wavelength, obviously. It will not be a PDF, Marissa. PDFs are kind of losing favor in the face of the WCAG 2.1 because not all PDFs are as accessible as they'd like to believe. It will be shared as a PowerPoint. I'm not sure how yet. I know that the presentation or recording of the presentation will be shared, I believe, on YouTube, you said, Alyssa?
Yes,
And I'll be sending the PowerPoint as well as the transcript to the UL system folks. So they'll have it and they can make it available. But if you're too impatient to wait for the presentation, you know how to find me. You can email me and I am glad to send you a copy of this along with the transcript if you would like ahead of time. I know somebody was saying, can I use this? Absolutely. And that's another reason I like having it as a PDF. I like not having it as a PDF, is that it's much easier to transform if it's in that original form. So just reach out to me if you want it sooner rather than later. Totally chill with that. This is all about making things accessible to people. And as you've probably figured out from me and Brandy, we're all about making this stuff accessible, whatever that means. If that means making it literally accessible under ADA terms, then yes. If that means accessible under affordability terms, that means yes. If that just means making it friendly for somebody who's differently abled than I am, yes. Whatever that means. Oh, but Brandy, we're librarians. We're going to be on a watch list anyway. Even if we're not breaking the law, we're on a watch list anyway.
Well, all right. Thank you so much, Dr. Megan Lowe, for your time. And we look forward to the next webinar in just a couple weeks in our series. Thank y'all.
Thank y'all.